Greetings and salutations, friends, and welcome back to the Sabbat Worlds Crusade, where Warmaster Slaydo is currently in the process of tearing his own hair out. Kokiaminus was intended to be another quick and easy victory, a security blanket to be thrown over any future advance to guarantee against an unexpected reversal. Instead, it had claimed the life of one of Slaydo's dearest and closest allies. Worse still, Kokiaminus had not been the final stepping stone towards Balhaut. It had been a distraction from the arch-enemy's own operations, which were now launching a counter-attack against Sverren. And this was but the latest and most severe in a series of setbacks that had besieged the Crusade. As its rearward lines, its fundament of worlds, were also beset by natural disasters. Disease, drought, and famine had all rendered several of the original staging worlds no longer suitable for the task at hand, making Sverren all the more important. It was one of now the only suitable assault vectors towards Balhaut. And just as Operation Newfound looked like it could finally do something worthwhile, enemy action got in the way. And at just the perfect time as well. I'm sure Imperial intelligence had their hands full searching the ranks for traitors, saboteurs, or any other way to explain this beyond simple bad fortune, and the enemy's own mounting desperation, as the attack on Sverren was, according to reports, led not only by Magister Scholen Skara, but Archon Nadzybar in person. It was decided to withhold this later piece of information, speculative as it was at the time, from General Buledin leading the defense of Sverren, so as to ensure that the presence of the enemy Archon could not demoralize the Imperial forces. As, frankly, annoying and disruptive as the attack most certainly was, it did not appear to present any real or immediate threat to a large or important part of the Crusade. If Sverren was to fall, then that would certainly be another massive setback for Operation Newfound, but beyond local defenders, there were no Imperial assets in immediate danger, which raised several questions as to why the enemy had chosen to strike here and now, and why they had determined this to be such an important objective that the Archon himself had taken to the field. This odd action would no doubt have further fueled rumors and speculations that there were Chaos agents within the Imperial ranks. After all, why else would they attack Sverren? As far as the enemy was concerned, Kokiaminus, Fornax Aleph, Echo's Hope, and Sverren were all seized by the Imperium. Surely a major thrust towards Balhaut could come from any one of these worlds. But, of course, that was not true. Fornax Aleph was not considered a safe path of advance, for obvious reasons discussed a couple episodes ago, and Echo's Hope had been rendered unsuitable due to disease and famine, leaving Sverren as the only real option, as it had the support of captured worlds like Ambold 11 and Indrid. Was the Archon's counter-assault now simple coincidence? Or did he know something that the Imperium did not? Or was this some sort of grand ploy? Considering previous actions, Warmaster Slaydo must have thought long and hard on that latter option. But as no trap appeared to be in the offing, dispatched reinforcements to Sverren, as there seemed to be no way that they could be cut off, or isolated, or even truly defeated. The counterattack had come suddenly, and it was certainly a significant danger to the local defenders under General Boledin, but this really did not seem to be some kind of grand reversal of fortunes. The only apparent advantage in striking Sverren now was in perhaps seizing or destroying large Imperial fuel reserves that had been organized on the planet in preparation for the attack against Balhaut, where Sverren would act as a forward operating base, allowing the Imperial Guard and Navy forces to shorten their own lines of supply. But even that, if Chaos managed to seize the fuel reserves, that would be another setback, but hardly a critical one. Thus, General Boledin was instructed to hold the Chaos forces at bay. He need not defeat them, he need only contain them, and protect the Imperial fuel reserves wherever possible. And that is exactly what he did. After his previous embarrassment on Sverren, as the world had taken him far longer than he had hoped to seize, General Boledin had grown quite accustomed and acquainted with the local terrain, and managed to put up a stiff, effective and determined resistance, to the point where, when finally the Imperial relief forces arrived in 761, the Chaos forces had not managed to break out of the southern continent of the planet. And with the arrival of fresh and ever-mounting Imperial forces, Chaos had no choice but to retreat, sending Magister Sholan Skara and the Archon himself in embarrassing withdrawal towards the world of Valence 160. Whatever the Archon had intended to achieve on Sverren, he had seemingly failed. And now that the Archon had been defeated in direct combat, it was deemed appropriate to announce his presence on the planet to Imperial Guard forces and across the Crusade in general as a significant victory. And it wasn't merely just a propaganda statement either. The enemy had expended a significant portion of their reserves, it seems, on this callous counterattack. The question as to exactly why this happened would be raised and re-raised many times over the course of the following weeks and months, as Imperial Command tried to sniff out some sort of reason or rationale, some sort of grander plot or ploy on behalf of this provenly insidious enemy. Now, the real reason why the counterattack on Sverren was so underwhelming and seemed to have so little in the way of a true objective worthy of the Archon, well, it might be simpler than one might think. It is often easy to overanalyze the actions of one's enemies, particularly one as sly as the Archon. But truth might be that the Archon was in a position not too dissimilar from the Warmaster. Bearing in mind, Slaydo himself was considered by most to be a strategic genius, and yet even he had doubters and discontent elements within his own ranks picking at his position, attempting to see their own plans brought into fruition so that they could see their own position within the Crusade and the Imperium elevated. Chaos is, if anything, even more fractious than the Imperium. And so far, Chaos had only really been able to stand by and sit on the defensive. This had clearly been the Archon's plan. This was obviously the reason why he had rushed past so many worlds deeper in the Sabbat system to begin to fortify a line against the Imperium. But his plan, in all due likelihood, had been to retard the initial advance of the Imperial forces, slowing and halting them via the use of fortified but still sacrificial worlds, before crushing them against the shields of the Hedwak naval formations, as had been demonstrated in the Chaos Triangle, and as had almost destroyed the Imperial diversionary force at Indrid. And had the Archon's opponent been a man like Hector Drevere, who would simply have driven directly towards Balhaut in one enormous spear thrust, this plan may very well have worked exceedingly well. If the initial worlds could have slowed the Imperial advance enough for the Hedwag forces to begin sweeping into their rears and harassing the supply lines, billions of Imperial guardsmen might be left a short distance inside of the fortified ring, with no real way of retreat. But that, of course, did not happen, and so Chaos was left to sit quietly on the defensive, watching the hated Imperium seize world after world without any clear advantage to be gained due to the Warmaster's slow, methodic, and careful approach. And if you think Imperial generals, currently enjoying a victorious if slow advance, could be impatient, imagine the pressure that the Chaos Generals must have been heaping upon Nadzybar. With constant urgings and petitions to attack, to seize the initiative somewhere, somehow, with all the short-sighted grace of a pack of bloodthirsty hounds. It is entirely possible that that was what Sverren was all about. A move forced upon the Archon by his generals. A move that had now backfired, and had seen the Imperium be given an opportunity to not only reclaim Sverren, but to push further into Chaos Hold territory and begin to contest Valence 160 as well. Now not defended and fortified to the degree that it might otherwise have been. But again, try telling all of that to the Imperial generals who now saw nothing more than another reversal, another delay, another slowdown in what they viewed as an ever more turgid and inglorious war. Yet another opportunity to nip at the Warmaster's heels. And to be fair, the Warmaster himself was growing tired of this slow advance. Not in his darkest of dreams had he ever expected Operation Newfound to move so slowly, to encounter so many setbacks and reversals. And again, unaware of the enemy's hardships, as most warring factions usually are, it seemed a bleak time for the Imperial Crusade. Indeed, we have a part of the Warmaster's own memoirs, which illuminate this feeling of dissatisfaction and turgidness very well. So, allow me to read it for you. In 763, Slaydo wrote the following: "They come to me like sour dogs, bewailing the slog, lamenting the losses. But it is only quick, fast glory they desire. Rascals, championing alternative schemes of war, petitioning me daily. I send them away. We have a scheme of war, one that has taken us this long to engineer. I will not be turned from it now. What? And waste the lives that have been lost? The suggestion is treason. The Rook berates me with calls for a rimward approach, and I know the old gong fancies those chances. Let them yap. It has always been Balhaut. It will always be Balhaut. These worlds turn upon that axis." With the references to the Rook and the old gong being to a pair of the Warmaster's, in many ways, faithful and yet also ambitious generals, Sibon and Revere, who had their own notions as to how the war should be fought. And they were not alone, As the Warmaster said in his memoirs, he was certainly beleaguered by differing opinions on how exactly the Sabbat Worlds Crusade should continue. There were those who argued for a different tact in the crusade, perhaps a whole-scale shift in the direction of its offensive. Perhaps sweeping behind the enemy might be a valuable option. Perhaps forgetting all of this scurrying about might be effective, and simply drive directly for the enemy's heart. Perhaps even the crusade should come to a complete halt for the time being. The enemy had clearly demonstrated now a capability to counterattack, so maybe fortification would be the preferred alternative. To hunker down, gather further reinforcements, ensure that all of the leaping-off points were thoroughly secured, and the Imperial Navy brought back up to full strength before another ploy could then be made towards the enemy's interests. Slaydo rejected all of these, even those who did have a fair bit of value and merit to them. Now, many of the ploys were in several ways fundamentally flawed. If the enemy had indeed, as they had, demonstrated an ability and a will to counterattack, then certainly changing tact entirely now and attempting to outflank the enemy could very easily be disastrous. What, more long, overextended supply lines to protect against an enemy that had finally found the will and ability to be mobile? That seems, dangerous at best, silly at worst. And as for sitting down, Slaydo's position was already becoming precarious. 2 years of inaction, and he might not be Warmaster at all anymore. And there were a whole array of convincing reasons for why Balhaut should be the continued objective of the crusade. It had gotten this far. One of the enemy's primary seats of power in this part of the Sabbat Worlds were right in front of them. A center for commerce, trade, and movement throughout the Sabbat system was at Balhaut, as it had countless Mandeville points and stable warp routes emitting out from it, not to mention guaranteeably vast stockpiles of enemy supplies, as well as the center of their command and control systems. Hitting Balhaut seemed like the only decent solution, and leaving it alone and going off on some other adventure, again, would be very, very ill-advised. However, the real reason Slaydo was so obsessed with Balhaut had something obviously to do with its strategic importance, but as he revealed in his own memoirs, it was because it was of import to the Saint, to Sabbat Beati, and to her campaigns in the Sabbat Worlds. Now, this might make his suitability for the position of Warmaster seem a pinch suspect again already, that he focused so much effort on a world because it was touched by the Saint, but the Saint herself had very valid reasons for seizing the world of Balhaut, the same valid reasons that the Warmaster now leaned upon to convince the rest of his generals, and there was now further reason as well to make Balhaut the sole focus of the crusade. For, Imperial intelligence is often overly paranoid, but the actions of the Archon, the attack on Sveren in and of itself, a seemingly silly and hopeless act really that could only achieve a delay to the Imperial crusade, well, again, how exactly did the Archon know this? And it seemed reasonable to assume, even without this final piece of evidence, that the enemy would by now have spies and infiltrators within the upper echelons of Imperial command and control. And as the enemy had again now demonstrated an ability to counterattack, the Warmaster started to figure that they might be out for blood just as much as he is. How can this be turned to the Imperium's advantage? Well, When you have spies within your ranks, you certainly have enemies telling your opposition your secrets, this is true, but you also have a direct line to the enemy. A direct line they trust. The Warmaster began creating false communiques, and he briefed only the absolute uppermost and trusted parts of his command cadre about his intent. These communiques that he were crafting seemed to suggest a major shift in the Imperial Crusade's focus towards the world of Fabia, directly north of Balhaut. The communiques seemed to suggest that a full-scale, massed deployment of the Imperial Navy would finally begin cutting its way through the Chaos Triangle, which had now been severely weakened by the activities of the Imperial Navy that we discussed several episodes ago. The Vahedwak blocking force was no longer as effective as it once was, and the enemy raiders that would have otherwise threatened the Imperium's lines of supply had also largely been neutralized, or simply chased out of the path of the Crusade. Now, as far as the Archon was concerned, this all made a lot of sense. The Imperium's efforts in the south had been thwarted by his counterattack. The battle on Valen 160 had been inconclusive at best, and his informants told him that Fornax Aleph was viewed with suspicion. Echo's hope had been rendered unviable due to natural reasons, and Kokiamenus too was not considered an excellent alternative due to its exposed position. So if the enemy was to make an advance on Balhaut, Fabia appeared to now be the most logical option, especially as the Imperial Navy was finally beginning to win the extended fleet war of the Chaos Triangle. All conventional strategies seemed to point towards Fabia being the next objective, and Slaydo now correctly read his opponent. If the Warmaster was beleaguered by his advisors, despite still being on the winning side, surely the Archon must be just as besieged. And if there was here every indication of the possibility of a major battle, there was no way the Archon couldn't leap at it, as even if he would want to not do so, his generals would force him to. With the falsified Imperial communiques all seeming to indicate moves towards Fabia, and the arch-enemy's desire to lock horns with the Imperium, Chaos's actions had practically been set in stone. And there was only one world that could possibly supply the logistical needs of an army and a navy large enough to challenge the Imperium in a single massed pitched battle over a world like Fabia. And that world was, of course, Balhaut. Now, considering how neatly all of the pieces slotted into place, maybe Slaydo had a point when he mentioned that he felt a certain prophetic draw towards the world. This is a strange universe, after all, where gods frequently interfere with the wills of men. Is it so hard to believe that the Beati might already have been guiding the actions of the Warmaster, or some grander force of fate, perhaps? Or maybe Warmaster Slaydo had finally seen an opportunity to outwit his opponent and use the thing that most bothered him to hurt the Archon. His underlings. There's a certain poetic justice in that, isn't there? And with the enemy's massed forces now located, and preparing not for a defense of Balhaut, but rather an active war of maneuver against Fabia and the Imperium, the stage was set for one of the largest surprise attacks in Imperial history, and perhaps even, God Emperor willing, a decisive blow towards the arch-enemy's forces, seizing not just the heart of its command structure in this part of the Sabbat Worlds, but beheading the Chaos forces, crushing their military might and shattering their naval forces. If the Archon could be killed, if his army and officers could be equally killed and scattered, the enemy might well devolve into the savage barbarism for which they were so rightfully famed, winning the war in a matter of weeks. Of course, this is still easier said than done. The enemy's massed formations on Balhaut would actually need to be destroyed first, and intricate naval maneuvers would need to be carried out. And this would be, in certain ways, a do-or-die scenario as well, with the only worlds capable of providing direct support being Kokiaminus and Spheren, both uncomfortably insecure and far away from Balhaut. If the Imperial forces met with defeat, well, suffice to say, Chaos were not the only ones risking complete defeat in this operation. But hey, the Warmaster would have the element of surprise, he would have the superior troops, and he would have the benefit of a large number of generals thirsting for that quick victory they'd been promised for so long. It was a gamble, but a calculated one. And as for its result, we'll finally get to that next episode, with the battle for Balhaut. Until then, I've been Arch. Thank you all very much for listening, and I hope to see you all again soon. Have a good day.